Hello, this is Nathan Smith from Fresno Pacific University. This is a presentation for Economics in Business, a class being offered currently in North Visalia and Fresno. Anyway, this is the slides from Chapter 1. We'll be going over these in class, but this is for review or for background information if people manage to look at it before class. So, alright, Chapter 1. Nature and scope of managerial economics. So, the definition of managerial economics is using economic theory and what they're calling here decision science to make the best decisions in an organization. So, to achieve aims or objectives, to achieve them most efficiently, and this is actually, it's a little different from most economic theory. Economic theory typically is implicitly being used to inform policymakers or just to interpret the world. But in this case, in managerial economics, economic theory is being used to inform decision-making by people who have responsibility for businesses or for firms or other organizations as well, but particularly businesses and private firms is sort of the ideal case, the most quintessential case of what we have in mind in managerial economics. But to some extent, it could cross-apply to nonprofits, it could cross-apply to government agencies and to other organizations that have aims and objectives which they want to achieve, hopefully in an efficient manner. But we won't work too hard to show how it cross-applies. We're mainly going to be thinking about private businesses. Okay, so this is sort of a typology. So we see we've got economic theory, we've got decision science, and notice that mathematical economics, econometrics, these are still kind of closely related to economics, but they're also kind of moving into statistics here. So this is a somewhat quantitative course. It's going to require some mathematical skills, and I think that people find that probably the hardest part of the course is some of the math, because we don't have really heavy prerequisites in terms of what math you already have to know when you're coming in, so people will be introduced to stuff sometimes for the first time, or sometimes to stuff that they haven't seen in a long time, and we'll have to learn it and apply it in this course. And so I'll try to go over that carefully, and I've posted a lot of links to Khan Academy videos so that you can learn it on your own. This is standard stuff. It's taught in a lot of places. There's lots of ways to learn it, but you do need to learn it in order to master the course material, which I hope everyone will do. Anyway, so you bring these together and you get managerial economics, so applying economic theory and decision science tools. So trying to get the optimal solutions to different kinds of problems. And the problems, I mean, we're thinking about this at a rather abstract level. So usually the problems will be not all that realistic, but they will have some relationship to real-world applications. So just be forewarned. You're sometimes going to have to use your imagination to sort of bridge the gap between what we're talking about in class and the types of problems that organizations really face. Okay, so economic theory is often split into microeconomics and macroeconomics. So microeconomics looks at the behavior of individual decision-making units, of workers, of managers, of firms competing with each other in the marketplace, that sort of thing. That's the starting point of microeconomics. Microeconomics also looks at how markets work, so that's sort of looking at interactive systems of many different decision-making units, but it isn't the whole economy. And microeconomics is really what's most relevant to managerial economics. Macroeconomics is where we want to answer questions like, why is unemployment higher than it was a few years ago? What determines levels of consumption in the economy as a whole? What determines levels of income, and so on, patterns of investment, price levels in the economy as a whole. You do need to be aware of this a little bit in managerial economics, mainly just because you're kind of on the receiving end of these macro trends. So if you're running a business, then it's important to you to know, oh, unemployment is high right now, so it'll be relatively easy to hire people. Or maybe, so we're going to get flooded with resumes of people who are not very suitable for the job. But at any rate, that's relevant to your decision. You might know, you might want to know, investment is depressed right now, so we don't have that much to worry about from new competitors, possibly. Or even more relevantly, consumption is rising, so this will be good. We can probably get a lot of sales right now. So the state of the macroeconomy can be relevant to managerial decisions for a number of reasons, but we don't really need to understand why the macroeconomy is in any particular state for present purposes. Although we do want to be able to forecast it to some extent. We'll talk more about that later on. But okay, so mathematical economics. Let me put in a word about math in general. Math is very abstract. It's very abstract and it's very general. That's the nature of math. That's the beauty of math, the strength of math. If you think about, if you put 2 cows together with 2 more cows, you have 4 cows. Okay, that's math, but it's kept at a very concrete level. We're actually thinking about, a particular kind of object here, a cow. Now say 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, this is more abstract. So we've moved from concrete objects to these abstract numbers. 2 of what? 2 of anything. It's all the same. So then, let's say x plus y equals z. Okay, now we're moving into algebra. And algebra, we're not using particular numbers. We're using symbols to represent numbers, and then we can solve things about systems in which maybe we never state what any of the variables actually represent. We learn things about the relationship between variables without knowing what they represent. So then you can go even further, and then you can use, you can talk about functions. Y equals f of x. So there's some relationship. We're not even sure what it is, so we've abstracted away from particular functions. This isn't entirely a math course, but that's in general what math does. It moves into more abstract areas. So when we're talking about mathematical economics, we're talking about using tools of mathematics. We're talking about sort of thinking abstractly and systematically about different kinds of problems. Econometrics, this is statistics. This is where you're dealing with randomness. So in pure math, you've got no randomness. In econometrics, you've got randomness. You're making assumptions about distributions of different variables, and you're trying to discern patterns amidst the randomness. So, sorry, this is all very abstract right now, but we'll get into more detail later on. Okay, now, economic models, this is a different kind of abstraction, although I guess it's related, but in economic models, what you do is there will be lots and lots of details in any real-world problem. What you want to do is be able to think about the problem clearly, so you abstract from a lot of these details, and you state the problem in sort of a simplified, a stylized form, and when in the simplified form, you can solve it. You can come up with a precise, clear solution, albeit only to a simplified version of the problem. But this clarifies links between cause and effect. So it basically clarifies your reasoning about these different, about the various situations we'll be discussing. And then you can go on to sort of try to build bridges back to the real world, figure out how closely it applies, and it can help you think more clearly about decisions. So then, evaluating economic models. I mean, okay, you started by abstracting from details, but maybe you've abstracted away from the details that are the most important. In fact, what's a detail and what's an essential feature of the model? Well, that's sort of an intuitive judgment. It's not necessarily going to be all that clear in every case, so sometimes maybe you left out the most important thing from your model. Well, that's where you get into evaluating economic models. And so, I mean, a lot of times, so you want accurate predictions, you want predictions that follow logically from the assumptions. The assumptions don't necessarily have to be all that realistic. I mean, it's probably better if they are at least somewhat realistic, but if you stress realistic assumptions too much, then you're going to make your problem so complicated you won't be able to solve it. So economists can be pretty tolerant of pretty unrealistic assumptions as they try to simplify problems enough to the point where they're solvable, and preferably even easily solvable so that you can, make it clear without enormous complicated simulations or vast reams of algebra or calculus or whatever. Okay, so kind of a generic description. To some extent, this is what we've been going over, but it's put into, you can call this an algorithm, actually, by a metaphor to computer science, but they say define the problem, determine the objective, identify possible solutions, select the best possible solution, implement the decision. So when do you want to apply this? Well, sort of any time. Any managerial decision problem could be this. It's sort of it's a formula for deliberate thinking about problems. So for sort of thinking clearly and systematically, rather than just impulse, knee-jerk reaction, or just custom. Custom sometimes is a good guide, but sometimes the way you've always done it may not be the best way. So okay, so theory of the firm. Why do we need a theory of the firm? Well, so I think for a long time economists would analyze things mainly in terms of thinking of demand and supply. Maybe you guys are familiar with demand and supply. We'll go over it, but well, if you're familiar with the demand and supply, there aren't really any firms there. Aren't really any firms in that model. In fact, you could ask a general question: why do firms exist in the world at all? Why not just have individuals trading with each other? So you do actually need a theory to try to come in and explain, this is what firms are for, this is what they do. And if you understand clearly, why there are firms and what their purpose is, maybe nobody does quite understand clearly, but at least they've thought about it carefully, and they've got various theories, which all of them probably have some truth in them. Then you might have a better idea. When is a good idea to do something in a firm? When is it a good idea to spin stuff off, buy it from private agents on the outside of the firm, and so on? How big do you want your firm to be? What's the best way to run firms and stuff like and so on? That will depend on your theory of the firm. So what is the purpose of a firm? Combines and organized resources for the purpose of producing goods or services for sale. Now, a market might do this too in a somewhat different sense, but a firm, you'll have one organization that is taking in a lot of resources and then directing them to achieve some goal. It internalizes transactions. This is a subtle point. So suppose you're doing business with somebody outside the firm. Well, you're hiring a consultant. You've got to sign a special contract for them. You've got to negotiate the terms of the special contract. And there's sort of problems of negotiation on both sides where, the value you place on their services might be a lot higher than the external value of their time, so there'll be a lot of issues of haggling and sort of guessing at the strength of people's negotiating positions, and it'll be a big mess. So, well, sometimes you want to do this, but there are a lot of costs involved in that, which can be avoided if you organize that activity internally. But in other cases, it's better to hire an outside consultant. So this is a tricky choice in general. But this is certainly one reason, I think, why firms exist. Now, economic theory tends to assume that the primary goal of managers is to maximize the value of the firm. Let me see how long this video's been. Well, that's probably enough. I'll come back to the theory of maximizing